Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's talk. For a change of pace, we're going to hear about art law tonight. So, Deborah DeMott is the David F. Cavers, is that how you pronounce it? Distinguished Professor at Duke University School of Law. She developed and continues to teach the law school's course on art law. A graduate of Swarthmore College and New York University School of Law, she joined the law school faculty in 1975. Over the years, she's taught as a visiting professor at several other universities in the United States, Europe, Canada, and Australia. Apart from art law, she's best known for scholarship and teaching focused on private law, in particular fiduciary duties, agency law, business associations, and tort law. But art law sounds a lot more interesting. So, welcome, Deborah.
Well, thank you, Margaret. And Margaret is right. Over my long academic career, art law is the only thing that at Duke-related and otherwise social events, cocktail parties, whatever, people really seem to want to talk to me about. Unless it's a lawyer with a case that has a particular kind of issue, issue in it. From looking backward, I mean, it was the lot of turns of good fortune that led to me teaching the course and then developing the course when I did. It roughly the Nasher Museum at Duke and the history of this course are coterminous. So, it was a really, really great time to start, and it also seemed like a time when general public interest in the many potential kinds of issues in the subject also became maybe more prominent than it had been, I think, before. So, really, really, really very fortunate. So I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to have the occasion to be with you this evening. We're going to use the occasion to discuss a recent case from the United States Supreme Court, which got a lot of newspaper coverage, and will reflect on its implications for the realm of contemporary art, which is usually not associated with the United States Supreme Court. So the case concerns, just a little background about the case. The case concerns copyright infringement and the defense of fair use, okay? So, for example, the images I'm going to show you, no, I don't have a license from whoever owns the image or whoever has the copyright interest in the image. This is because a classical instance of fair use is educational. Okay, so that that's an easy example of it. So this is the first. There are several Supreme Court copyright cases involving the defense of fair use, but this is the first. This case is the first in the context of the visual arts, although the question we're going to talk about has bedeviled lower courts for quite some time. Okay, so just a little bit first. I promise you this is not too boring, and then we'll look at the picture. We'll get to the slides. So what is copyright, and why is that potentially relevant here? So in copyright law, someone who writes a book or a painter, an artist who makes a painting is called an author. So if I use the term author, it's because it's the copyright terminology, but in our context, you would mean, artist. Okay? So by virtue of having made an original work expressed in a fixed medium under the Copyright Act of 1976, the author then has copyright, and a primary right that copyright grants is the right to make or license making derivative works. Okay? So there are a lot of cases and a lot of commentary about various forms of derivative use. For example, a movie or a film based on a novel would be a derivative work for copyright purposes, and it's a quintessential example. It comes up again and again in the Supreme Court's opinion in the case I'm going to discuss as to when the author who's making the derivative work would need a license, okay? Because otherwise this would be an infringement on the copyright interest of the original author. So if you think about it, copyright potentially, on the one hand, can encourage creativity and creative expression in many, many ways. But think about the derivative right, and that part of copyright could also infringe and hamper the creativity of others. Okay? So it is the challenge for the doctrine of fair use to do most of the work in balancing the author's derivative rights and vis-a-vis the creativity of others. Okay? And as we'll see, we require inquiry by the court into the purpose of the infringement. Why the infringement? Am I infringing the rights of the copyright owners of the copyright in the images? I'll show you. Well, yes, I am. But why am I doing that? Well, I'm doing that for a purpose that Congress itself recognized as a kind of a central example of fair use. Okay? And does the infringing use take away the market for the copyrighted work? As we'll see examples of, is another part of the inquiry. Okay, so the question in the case we'll talk about is the operation of the fair use defense as applied to contemporary artists whose strategies can include appropriating in the work that they make works made by others. Okay, there are two artists in the case. Okay, I'll say more about their work in a moment. The first whose work we'll see is Lynn Goldsmith, who is a prominent commercial photographer, best known for portrait photography, in particular of musicians and rock and roll musicians. The second artist is Andy Warhol, and more about him. Andy Warhol, so Lynn Goldsmith is still alive and celebrating her victory because she won in the Supreme Court case. Andy Goldsmith, who was born in 1928, died in 1987. Warhol. Okay, Andy Warhol. So the other party in the case is the Andy Warhol Foundation, which was created pursuant to the terms of Andy Warhol's will and estate plan. Okay, much more about the foundation in a moment. And the work in question in the case made by Andy Warhol was made in 1984, which is towards the end of Warhol's career. Okay, a point that I'll come back to. Okay, so onward to the works. This doesn't seem to be moving. Maybe I do it here. Let's see. Okay, good. Okay, so this is the work of Lynn Goldsmith. This is a portrait photograph that Lynn Goldsmith made of the musician Prince, okay, in 1981. We could call it the source work or the infringed upon work. But source sounds a little less ominous, I think, than infringed upon. Okay, so just to, I don't seem to have a pointer, but notice then that I think you could say that Goldsmith's intention is capturing on film this very distinctive, specific individual. I would say here in a thoughtful, sensitive way, okay? She thought that Prince, this one, okay. She thought Prince was a vulnerable person and who was all of a sudden becoming famous, okay, as a musician, and her objective was to capture this in her photograph. Okay, so fairly early on in the career of the musician Prince, he came to note, he came to be visible, and he attracted the interest of the publisher Condé Nast, who sought to do a magazine feature about Prince in their publication Vanity Fair. Okay, so Vanity Fair commissioned Andy Warhol, okay, to work from a source image, i.e. a photograph, right, a source photograph of Prince, which, whoops, okay, this. There, okay. That was not working before, but it is now. Okay, so this is the image that Warhol made, or the work that Warhol made, published in Vanity Fair with, not visible here, with an artist's credit to Lynn Goldsmith, okay, and a license fee to Lynn Goldsmith. And we can see, obviously that these are two different artists with different aesthetics and different styles. So Warhol has flattened out Prince's features. He's simplified the image, and he's applied color, right? These two contrasting colors, and made some other revisions based on the source image. Okay, so this was published. Okay. But he did more. He did a lot more. Okay, so Warhol also made a series of limited edition silkscreen prints at the same time. So Goldsmith's license was what we would call a single-use license, like for just one publication and one work by the artist who was using the source image. But Warhol made a series of limited edition prints with not telling Goldsmith and no additional license from Goldsmith. I'll show you one of those now. Okay, sometimes known as the Orange Prince. Okay, so this is, when I'd say here, this is looking like it's going to be the infringing use, right? And that would be right, okay? And that would be right. Okay, so Andy Warhol, again, died in 1987. Okay, Prince passed away in 2016. Okay, but Prince, by that point, it's fair to say, had become kind of iconic celebrity figure. I think as Warhol, depicted him, and as he famously depicted many other people too. At the time of Prince's death, again, Condé Nast was interested in doing a publication, considered various Prince images that they might license, okay, and contacted, by this point, Andy Warhol's foundation. Andy Warhol, by that point, being deceased. So, Orange Prince was published, okay, on the cover of the Prince commemorative publication from Condé Nast. Goldsmith was startled, right, when she saw it, right, and clearly recognized, that it was her work that had been the source image. Okay, so my own take on this, on the case and the issue the Supreme Court necessarily confronted, I think I'm not unique in having this view, but it may well be the minority view. I just warn you that, of people interested in this subject. It's important to me to keep in mind that the decision to publish the infringing work was not the decision of the individual artist Andy Warhol, who was gone, right? He was gone. He was a victim of medical malpractice some years earlier, and he was gone. Okay, the decision was the decision of his foundation, which it's true that the foundation was established by Andy Warhol, but of course legally they're different people, and legally we don't have a clue what Andy Warhol would have decided in 2016 himself. Would he have thought that maybe you should notify Goldsmith, pay a license fee to Goldsmith, apologize to Goldsmith? I don't know. But that's the posture of the case before the court. It's also true that as a charitable foundation, the Andy Warhol Foundation is, we say here, limited in what it can do. So individual people are free to, for example, give away their property if they wish, to whomever they wish. Not so a charitable foundation, right? It must follow the requirements, right, of the instrument or the purposes, right, for which it was established. Okay, so I want to show you two more images along these lines. So a wonderful student of mine who took my art law course last year, Shannon O'Hara, found herself in Pittsburgh this past summer and visited the Andy Warhol Museum, which is distinct from the foundation, but they're clearly related. So she visited the museum and generously she photographed and sent to me what she saw on the wall. Okay, so as far as, I think they're still there. So on display in the museum, in the Andy Warhol Museum, are 4 of the dozen silkscreen prints that Andy Warhol made, the others having been sold, okay, by the foundation, or given by the foundation to other museums. Okay, these 4. And Shannon O'Hara also quite wonderfully photographed the museum label. Okay, so this would have been, so the court decided the case in June, okay, and Shannon was in the museum about July, Okay, so this is what the museum has to say. Reaffirmed a lower court decision that the foundation violated the copyright of Lynn Goldsmith, who took the source photo for these portraits of the singer Prince. The decision does not question their authenticity or their value. It's limited, and this is true, it's limited to a single image license that the Warhol Foundation granted to the publisher of the memorial publication. Okay, so the museum's ability to display and loan Warhol's works, i.e. the 4 silk screens I just showed you, remains unchanged, as the court says in the opinion, including the Prince portrait. Now, this is what we're going to focus on now. It does, however, raise issues about appropriation, a practice Warhol regularly employed, which is just what we were looking at, okay? Now, okay, when working with found materials and images circulated in the mass media and popular culture. Okay, so we might well wonder, and it's clearly, I think, this animates the Supreme Court opinion, well, found materials. I mean, Lynn Goldsmith's photograph of Prince is not exactly a piece of trash. No, it's the work of another artist, right? A different kind of artist from Andy Warhol, of a sort whose works typically would have, much lower value, and in markets for commercial photography, not fine art, but nonetheless, okay? So this probably, would I have drafted it this way myself as a lawyer? I don't think so. I think that is inconsistent with acknowledging the authorship, for example, of photographers and the images. And there are these images, but who makes these images? Where do these images come from? They're just sort of like rocks or pebbles that you find, right, on the ground. Well, I don't think so, and the Supreme Court didn't think so, as the label acknowledges, didn't think so either. So moving on a little bit, and then this frames this issue a little bit more. There's clearly a long-standing practice going back centuries of artists who quote from prior works made by others or in some way refer to them, and I don't think those are viewed as raising copyright infringement questions. But I thought it would be interesting to look at a few examples, okay, of what I would call quotation or reference to earlier works, just to kind of see the depth of the kind of like what is accepted practice, I would say, within visual art. So some of these, I've sort of weighted this heavily towards works of art that I saw locally, mostly in the Nasher. Okay, so here, yes. Well, okay, so this is a painting by Clarence Hayward from 2020. He's an artist whose studio is in Durham, and the work is now owned by the city of Raleigh. I don't know where it's displayed. And the title that Hayward has given this work is Liberty Enlightening the World. So this is actually my photograph. It's a large-scale work. We see the figure is very elongated. The model happens to be Clarence Hayward's wife. I think myself that the visual impact of the work is strengthened by Clarence Hayward's use of gold leaf or gold foil in the background. I read a newspaper article based on discussions with both of them, and they refer to her pose as the Statue of Liberty pose. Okay, so that's in a way, if you think about it, it's a quotation, right? That's something you might well think about. A viewer might well think about in looking at this work. Okay, so the Statue of Liberty, I assume here, thinking back, I would think the sculptor, yes, probably had a copyright interest. Maybe if it's owned by the United States of America, maybe not. But in any event, at some point, copyright ends. Copyright in the United States extends for the life, if it's an individual, the life of the author, plus 70 years. And so regardless, that's way beyond any conceivable kind of copyright interest in an image, a derivative image of the Statue of Liberty. Okay, so you might also think, and my first thought when I saw this piece was, this work. Yes, okay, so this is Eugène Delacroix, 1830, Liberty leading the people. Okay, not quite as close in the pose, but pretty close, okay? So liberty, we've got liberty enlightening the world, liberty leading the people. Okay, so as it happens, at least in the United States, there is no copyright in titles. Okay, so if there were, we'd be in big trouble. I mean, think of all of the works of art that you've seen that are untitled as the title. Oh, no, right? There's just not enough to work with there, right, for there to be viable as a copyright interest. And in any event, at least under U.S. law, any conceivable copyright interest in Delacroix, right, the artist's descendants would have ended. Okay, so there's quite a rich array of works, we would say, in the public domain, right, that don't raise copyright infringement issues. Okay, I thought I'd also show you a work in 3 dimensions, okay, a 3-dimensional sculptural piece, inspired, as it happens, by a 2-dimensional piece. Okay, as we've got a reverse example coming up towards the end of the lecture. Okay, so this also I saw at the Nasher. This is by the artist Jeff Bell. This is Nautilus. He's given the title Nautilus from around 2015. It's fairly large. You've got a sense of the scale just from the photo. He made it, he says, repurposing a piano that had been discarded, right, to make this work, this piece. According to an interview with Jeff Bell and the museum's website, he had an inspiration. He was inspired by his favorite Disney movie when he was a kid, which was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea from 1954. So, this. Wow, yeah, okay. A 2-dimensional work, right? It's an animated work, very much, a moving image, but nonetheless, this is a still from it. But of course, the film, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, is what? Is an adaptation of a novel by Jules Verne. Okay, so we see then another example of a derivative work. So, as is said in the novel, that we observed a strange-looking metal vessel, okay, in kind of a nautilus shape, a shape found in nature. Okay, so copyright issues. I mean, notoriously, the Walt Disney Company, as a copyright owner, yes, corporations can own copyrights, can be a copyright holder. Notoriously, they're very aggressive in protecting their copyright interest. Would they potentially have a claim against Jeff Bell? No, because what's being infringed? This really doesn't much go with that, right, or much follow that. I mean, both are both replicate in a way or interpret a shape found in nature or seen in nature. There's no copyright on titles, right? Copyright on an idea? Well, no, right? Copyright protects expression, right? Not ideas. Okay, so I move on to maybe a little bit closer examples. These would be art made by artists like Warhol, whom we're coming to, but artists who use images that refer pretty directly to popular culture, which 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was, right, when Jeff Bell and I were kids. 20,000 to popular culture and the imagery used in popular culture. Okay, so let me show you now. Okay, a slide of a painting I saw this summer in Antwerp. Okay, so I think I think in general the Flemish visual culture is pretty conservative. Okay, and this is not to be taken as an exemplar for Belgium, or in particular Flemish art in particular, but I saw this in a gallery in Antwerp. The artist is Armin Aloyan. He refers to his work as CRP. CRP. What is that? It is cartoon-related painting. Okay. The style, but notice the style. This doesn't look like, right, and the Disney images, except that, well, it seems like it's Donald Duck. Okay, so the style is very painterly, right? The artist himself refers to abstract expression, expressionism. The painter Willem de Kooning was a big influence for him. His works sort of explode almost, right, on the canvas. And here is a shot I took of the gallery and what the gallery looked like, okay, with these on display. And we can see that Donald had some other friends with him, okay, for the museum display. Copyright infringement issues? I don't think so. No, right? I mean, this is popular culture, iconic cartoon figures as inspiration. Okay, so let's take now an example of a pop culture reference that's a little closer, maybe, that I saw last year at the Nasher. Okay, so last year, as you may remember, the Nasher had a wonderful exhibition of the early work of Roy Lichtenstein, okay, before he fully developed his mature style, which is very much pop art. Okay, so early on, Roy Lichtenstein read kids' books to his children, okay, including Disney books, okay? And he's a wonderfully creative artist who at that point was trying out many different styles. So this drawing is Mickey Mouse #2, Roman II from 1958. And again, it was on display at the Nasher. I read in the catalog that Lichtenstein never displayed these works publicly, at least during his lifetime. Okay, they're owned by his foundation now, which clearly was comfortable with making a loan to the Nasher, right, for purposes of the museum exhibit. This is more, I would say maybe more recognizably the cartoon image of Mickey Mouse, but lots of other things too present, okay, present in the image. Okay, so Roy Lichtenstein, of course, became famous as a pop artist. A kind of breakthrough work for him was this very large-scale painting, which is now in the National Gallery in DC. This is Hey Mickey. Okay, Hey Mickey. Okay, it's a very large-scale piece, right, in one of our nation's, very leading museums. This is a very, very well-known example of pop art. And here I found the source image, okay? And the source image was a little golden book, okay, with Mickey and Donald and Friends stories, okay? And the point of showing this to you is so that we can see maybe a reason why Roy Lichtenstein never got sued, as far as we know, as far as I was told by the curator of the exhibition. It's true that his work is clearly, I would say, inspired by, makes reference to, quotes, popular art sources, okay? But I would say that Lichtenstein made so many alterations. I mean, he's greatly simplified the work, way greatly simplified the work. He's narrowed the focus to Mickey and Donald, and the silly thing that Donald is doing and how funny Mickey thinks it is. And he's executed all of this on, then, a wonderfully large scale. Okay? So notice then that appropriation can mean many things, right? And this seems, to me anyhow, this is more reference or quotation. So, we could say, moving on then, is it enough of a change that a work more precisely follows the source, but is in a different medium? Okay, so I would now show you the images associated with a much debated case. Okay, that the Supreme Court was not as an opinion from the Supreme Court. Wisely, I think, they decided not to say anything about this particular lower court precedent. So we're moving now in from Lichtenstein's era, right, in the early 60s, into the 1980s. So this is a photograph, a postcard using an image from a photograph made by Art Rogers, who is a commercial photographer. It's a string of puppies. He licensed it for use for a postcard that was sold, where souvenir postcards would be sold. The artist, Jeff Koons, saw the postcard, was involved in making a series of sculptures under the general title Banality, and saw promise here. Okay, there's a certain, we say there's a certain sentimentality to this. Well, yes. So he bought one of the postcards, gave it over to the very highly skilled artisans who worked to execute sculptures based on his conception, directed them to make it as close, as identical to the photograph as they could, but on a fairly large scale, as we'll see in a moment. Okay, so this involved, I'm holding off showing you these images, the application of color. Okay, the sculptures are made of wood. Okay, wood, they're polychromed wood. It's a limited edition sculpture. Again, beautifully executed, as close as possible to the photograph. Okay, so could say in this difficult era, to some courts, the question was whether the infringing use transformed the source into something it was not before. And you might think this is an easy case. It's transformation of photograph to three-dimensional sculpture. Okay, and on a much larger scale, and three-dimensional and with color. Okay, and with some additionally, it's kind of silly-looking additions. Okay, fair use or not? Well, no, according to the court that had this case. And for a long time, I was persuaded by this. So what I'm showing you is the photograph that was always reproduced in copyright books. Okay, copyright textbooks, student case books, okay? I had the opportunity to see one of these editioned works when it was on museum display in New York in a retrospective of the work of Jeff Koons, and I now find this a much harder case because look at my photograph directly from life. They look much more persuasively three-dimensional, volumetric, not exactly lifelike, okay? But again, more being contributed, right, to the work by the infringing artist, more persuasively true to life. And then I had the idea, because the way this was displayed, of seeing what would look like if I took a photo from the side, and even more so. Okay, now you could say, well, the fact that the polychromed wood is so beautifully executed, like a very fine piece of religious sculpture, for example, that really shouldn't affect one's analysis from a copyright standpoint. But again, I'll just say that I find this difficult. So candidly, I'm not clear what the status of this precedent is. That this is too close to the source image to be fair use. Okay. So we're moving on, and step back. We think back for a moment to what I told you I found problematic about Warhol's practice, right? Which is then, or as the museum describes it, is treating the source photo made by a, well, frankly, commercial artist or commercial photographer as found material. Okay, mere found material, or the work of a fellow artist, although working in a different genre and for a different market. Okay, so this brings me to my final slide. Okay, so this is Campbell's Soup 1 tomato. It's a silk screen. It is, as it happens, in the permanent collection of the Nasher Museum. The museum having received it as a gift from the Andy Warhol Foundation. It's 1962, so it's relatively early Warhol. Okay, so a couple of things we could say about this. There are Supreme Court opinions involving copyright law and infringement and fair use defenses in other realms. Okay, so for example, computer software that refer to an artistic painting or an artistic treatment of a soup can as an example of what would be fair use. Okay, and sort of then, what do we think here, right? Well, reading recently in a study that a colleague of mine at another university has done, I think it's informative to think about the practice of contemporary artists, I mean, those making art now, and their practices and their opinions. So, according to my friend's survey research and interviews that she's done, they celebrate Campbell's soup. They view Campbell's soup, this is as much my phrasing as my friend's, as an example of punching up. That is to say, it's a critique of corporate power, corporate imagery, corporate products, and their pervasive presence, punching up against the more powerful. Okay? They find works like, yes, String of Puppies and The Orange Prince as examples of punching down, taking from the less powerful, taking from the less famous artists, okay, and using them for one's own end. Okay, so my conclusion that the Supreme Court's opinion is one very narrow and not likely to much chill art being made now is that art has moved on. Okay, the moment of appropriation and the celebration of simple appropriation as a valid art form is no longer dominant. Not say it's gone away, but I would say it's no longer dominant, if it ever was. Artists, contemporary artists working now, wish to make their own mark, have their own presence, have their own individuality going forward. They're not into simply exploiting the work of others. Okay, and we think about some of the wonderful examples of contemporary art being made now. It's so full of feeling, okay? Doesn't have this kind of flat affect. We see the great recent success of artists like, say, well, Clarence Hayward, okay, and even more famously, Kehinde Wiley, Amy Sherald. We see great interest in the figurative depiction, right? Figurative depiction. We see interest in narrative art, as in, say, the work of Kerry James Marshall. Okay, so my thought is there will be, I think here maybe little impact from the case. And finally, we need just to keep in mind just how narrow the case is. And it's not necessarily invalidating the work of Andy Warhol, right? It's finding copyright infringement liability simply on the part of the foundation for one particular use. And who knows, by now, or 2016, where Andy Warhol's still alive, what he would have decided. So I'm happy to take any questions or any comments.
Questions or comments? Oh.
It occurs to me that there might be huge impact from computers and the ability to much more rapidly reproduce things. How does that play out in the copyright field?
How does that play out? I think...
The question was computers. What's the effect of computers in the copyright field?
Yeah, so I think in the visual arts sphere, okay, I think that contemporary artists are quite aware that people armed with a computer and a program that enables them to pull images from wherever, right, and agglomerate them, is what? Is a fact of the world that we live in, right? I would also say that for computer applications like generative AI, as applied to, again, swooshing up images from all over, right, for one purpose or another, the copyright infringement litigation has only begun. Okay, so I think AI proceeded without, as far as I can tell, any licenses. Okay, so I think at least one of the major systems was trained on images from Getty Images, which is a really large, well-curated image database with no license at all. Isn't it shocking, right, that they sued? So I think it's early days to see how that would work out. I mean, I wonder sometimes whether that kind of use of AI would eventually become sort of like music copyright. Okay, so I think maybe, I think it might be that other people in here are also old enough to remember back when you could download for free any song you wanted by anyone you wanted and share it with anyone you wanted. And that went away, right? I mean, because in music then the solution was systems like Spotify. You know, that, yes, that do permit downloading, but they also include a viable licensing system so that the artists who compose the songs, who perform the songs, and the music companies who produce, right, the recorded music, can be paid. So it's a possibility, right, that the same kind of solution would emerge in the computer-generated work too. I would also just share one other anecdote, and I'm sparing you an image of this. In the spring of 2019, I was asked by the what are they called now? Like the Technology Law Society at Duke Law School, which is a student group, to give a talk about a work of art entirely generated by an adversarial AI system that had sold. It sold at auction at Christie's in London in the Princeton Multiples. They didn't know where to put it. I mean, the Princeton Multiples auction. Like around $500,000, which is a serious amount of money. So I prepared the lecture. I learned more than, frankly, I knew before, and that was a good thing about adversarial generative AI systems. I never met anybody, including the students, enthusiastic students who came to this lecture, the tech enthusiasts, who could say with a straight face that they liked the painting, that they found anything in the painting of visual interest, or that they found it emotionally engaging. So it was supposed to be AI generating an old master style portrait on having been trained on many, 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 many images of old master portraits. And oh, it's such a depressing looking, non-specific kind of thing. Whoops. And I knew that would happen. Yeah, I've got it. Okay. Okay. I haven't seen any others coming up for auction.
Closer to your mouth, please.
So I haven't seen any others coming up for auction. So I think whoever bought it at auction, I think it's still theirs, but I haven't seen any others. So the potential credibility, to go back to your question, the potential credibility, which is say here, let alone market value of this kind of work, I think would be very hard to assess right now.
Uh, how much does money play in all of this? It seems like if there's an unfair expense or an unfair amount of money made off of, I don't know. I just think it's really hard. But once somebody spends an unbelievable amount of money for a Warhol, if it's not one of the originals, it ain't worth the paper it's put on. And they have to have an original.
So I think that that's one of the reasons the court's opinion in the case is a very narrow one and a very cautious one. Okay, I mean, so the court, so as to Warhol pieces, right, limited edition pieces or unique paintings that are in private collections, I think the court was quite aware of the value of, let me say here, stability. Okay, so thus the narrowness, the narrowness of the opinion. Some, in my opinion, some people way overread this opinion to call into question, as the museum label said, the authenticity, right, of Warhol's works that have already been sold, right,
Oh, wow.
or works that are in the foundation, collection. And it's reading the opinion, it's quite clear to me that no, the court doesn't do that.
So is this going to provoke a lot of other lawsuits? Will this provoke more lawsuits from people?
It could. Yeah, it could. But on the other hand, on my account is that contemporary artistic practice has really changed. Okay? So away from this kind of direct appropriation, right? Because we could see here, in my narrative, no one sued Roy Lichtenstein, including Disney, right? Which is very aggressive, surprisingly aggressive. Okay, but I don't think it's surprising, looking at the Lichtenstein works, that he wasn't sued, right? I mean, that he would, that Disney would have been advised that he doesn't have, Lichtenstein wouldn't have had a 100% for sure fair use defense, but pretty good. And these, then the facts of the Andy Warhol Foundation against Goldsmith are more extreme, right? And the kind of the facts where you might anticipate that the fair use defense wouldn't be as likely to be successful.
It seems to me that in something like the Warhol with the Campbells or the Mickey Mouse, the companies that could sue is actually being enhanced. Their reputation is being enhanced, and they're getting free marketing out of it. So I don't know who should be suing who there.
Yeah.
But I was wondering, when you apply this to someone whose entire competitive advantage depends on applying art to some kind of a product they make, what happens then with this, with companies making knockoffs of companies?
Yeah.
Are they protected by patent law and copyright if they're not patented?
No, my interests are very narrow. No, they don't go there. But the history of the Campbell's Soup series is interesting, okay, in this respect. So Warhol made not just tomato soup, right? Not just the tomato soup can, but many other variants of Campbell's Soup. I have read that at first Campbell's Soup was not happy about this, and considered suing, okay? Because this is clearly like not Roy Lichtenstein and Mickey Mouse, but finally decided not to, and bought a full set and had them on display, I think, in the executive dining room. Yeah, sure.
So your title for the talk was The Annals of Art Law. And I'm just wondering if you could tell us what do you know of as the earliest example of this kind of a case being litigated?
The earliest example
With a licensed work of art?
with this would be an unlicensed use. The earliest example I can think of an unlicensed use of a work of visual art would be probably String of Puppies,
Golly,
or at least of
oh.
the cases that are well known. Because we notice here, I mean, the generation of pop artists, sort of exemplified here a little bit, I would say, by Lichtenstein, are very much, I would say, making the source, using the source to make their own, okay? And it's not until the era of maybe Warhol, and then Jeff Koons, and Richard Prince, whom I did not discuss, that just more straightforward appropriation came to be the tactic. Reading these opinions, so many of these opinions are from the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, which is in New York, which historically has been a very important court for the development of copyright law. I always thought that the judges always profess that they're not art critics, right? And that this is a different world. But I also get the sense that they liked the cases, and that these were interesting, more interesting to work on than some other kinds of IP cases that would come to that court. So it may be that this is a particular reaction ultimately in the law to a particular era in the making of art in the United States that was when it was a thing, appropriation art, and I myself don't think it is much anymore. Oh, that's a great example. That's a great question. So there's no requirement in copyright law that an artist grant the license. Okay, so in other words, if Warhol had asked Campbell Soup for a license, right, to use the design of the label and the soup can, there's no duty, no obligation on Campbell's to grant the license. Okay, once Warhol's made the work, right, the work that he made, and he has the copyright interest in it, he's under no obligation to license somebody else's derivative use of it. Okay, so some artists vary in their own licensing practices. Okay, so some artists view, I have an example in 30 seconds, view some kinds of derivative works as destructive of the integrity of the work itself. So I have read that the children of the painter Mark Rothko, who manage his estate, manage his foundation, and control licensing, right, of copyrighted works made by their father, Mark Rothko, have refused to license the use of their father's paintings on those little tear-off notepads, right? Perhaps on the thought that sheet by sheet, they'd be losing their father again, symbolically. And that seems to trivialize, right, the seriousness of the artist's work. Okay? So unlike patent law, where licensing is mandatory under some circumstances, it's not in copyright. So it's true, if you think back then, if Warhol had requested a license from Goldsmith to make orange prints, she could have said no. But there's nothing in the record to indicate that he did or that the foundation did for the 2016 publication.
Well, does the artist actually have to copyright the work, or is it automatically his or her work?
Well, the artist is the author. Therefore, the artist has the copyright. The artist can't assign the copyright.
Right, but
Right?
they have, if they want the copyright, they have to actually do it. They have to do
They
something.
don't no, under the 76 Act, they don't have to do anything. If they want to sue, they have to register it.
Okay.
Okay, but under the Act, no, the copyright attaches to the work, okay, without any paperwork by the artist, yeah.
I think
Yeah.
we have to end here. We're over time, but this was really, really interesting. Thank you so much. That was all kinds of